So we've got Melissa talking now. So I'm going to start with you. Sure. Okay. So our first question is, how is AI going to change the landscape for roles and skills in the DevOps and testing roles?
I think it really depends on strategy, right? So I don't think it's going to change much. I think I see a lot of data scientists in the world, right? I also think that in terms of not only data scientists and this for the artificial intelligence that are also participating in machine learning. So basically, everyone just has to start jobs, right? So now trying to think of how to increase the speed of what you're doing now and being able to make it. I do think that a lot of these organizations are looking at shifting the roles in DevOps. I want to start to look at how to strategize a little bit better. So it's not necessarily about serious role.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so as I said, past 1.5 months, I've been moving, going to different cities in the US and meeting a lot of people from everyone from big finance companies like Morgan Chase, Capital One, and then all the way to new startups. There's a lot of talk about AI. A lot of companies are exploring. Nobody's at direct, right? So a lot of companies are using, exploring AI tools. Everybody is talking about that. Will, like, the biggest challenge everybody's thinking is, will AI replace my job? My best answer is this: no, it won't. It's gonna take a lot of time to get at that stage. But there are a lot of things, of course, AI can help out with. But I feel that one of the biggest advantages that AI will be there is helping collaboration as well. So let's take a very big company's example. They have a lot of DevOps teams working on individual projects, but they are all working in silos, right? So they have multiple Jenkins workflows or multiple different workflows across different machines, across different infrastructure layers, but these guys are not talking with each other. I think AI can help out connect everything together, right? So instead of going and asking somebody, you're gonna just ask like Siri, like, hey Siri, hey, my personal AI, I want to run this kind of workflow in my DevOps environment. Is there something already present? So it will check across the whole company, find out this is a workflow that somebody else is running, is similar stuff that you can replicate. Right? So something like that, like, collaborate, connect the information across different, just in the secure company. I'm not talking about things that comes outside, like from different environments. Just in the same environment can help collaborate. Right? Of course, there are a lot of use cases, but this one I see that is the biggest one that can help.
So yeah, it's interesting. We've been talking, doing some research at the company, and talking to other partners sort of doing a lot of R&D. So when you look at the R&D, like what's the leading edge of what generative AI specifically can do, I mean, it's quite amazing. Now, again, sort of not almost laboratory conditions, you can give it a sketch on a napkin of an app, and it will build some code. Some of our clients, big company in this area, Delta, they're a big automation client of ours. They're using Windows Copilot to write code in our testing tool for them. And the crazy thing is, we didn't even know it could do that. And we're thinking, like, how can it do that? Well, guess what? Copilot ingested all the public GitHub repos that were out there. And we published a whole bunch of good samples for humans to use. Like, well, if you want to test that Dynamics 365 or Dynamics AX or Salesforce SAP or whatever it is, publish lots of really good examples for a human to, like, that's a really good framework. That would be great. Well, AI read all that stuff. So they said, well, Deltek's an ERP system. It's a bit like Dynamics, it's a bit like SAP, right? And it was able to write meaningful code and accelerate their test automation journey. And they share it to us and like, how does that look? That's a really good feature you have. And we're like, we have, do we? So I think as a wake-up call, when you try and show you stuff that you think is impossible, that was a real big wake-up call this year. That so in different disciplines, when you look at the design, the UX, there's now AI that can listen to a UX video where you're recording user interactions of an app or a to-be-built app, and it can build out a transcript. It can give you feedback. So every discipline, whether it's UX designers, requirements engineers, biz analysts, developers, and we get test automation. There have been tests where they've been able to give an app to an AI that can run through some scenarios like an exploratory test, take screenshots, give feedback that it's never seen before. Now, it's not perfect, but you start to think about every job in the DevOps pipeline or every job in the SDLC, think of the infinity loop of DevOps. Every square in that loop, AI is going to change. So the question was, how do we change the roles? I think if you go into this world and say, I'm a Selenium automation engineer, or I'm a DevOps pipeline creator, then in 3 years, you probably aren't doing that job. Now, you are still employed, and you're doing a new job. The question is, are you willing to, are you willing to do that? So I think it's going to change everyone's title, it's going to change everyone's day-to-day skills, but it's not necessarily going to change the role. I don't know, that's, do you think that's true? Or
I think what something that you touched on was framework, right? I think that having the right framework in place is going to be very because then you have
right, the training model is learning, right?
So I think a lot of organizations are now scattered trying to figure out, but what can you do to put in?
Right.
And they're like, well, we're just going to throw a co-pilot at it, and it's going to work. And technically, we don't have to framework to have the model run. We learn based on patterns. So you don't have to patterns. That model's going to take. And I think having the right framework and then understanding to make sure the staff in alignment with that framework to be able to grow to the area of as long as you have, I'm always going to talk about strategy because that's the only way that you can, right? So if we don't have all those things, it doesn't matter. So then you have to. I think also we're throwing out AI a little bit too much. I think if we're specific on what type of AI that we're talking about, then you can be more specific on what types of roles can be aligned with that. Learning or whether it's generative AI, whatever it is, we're specific in that. Then those roles are going to align with that type of.
And insight I want to add with this, whatever roles are going to change. But I still feel that few roles will also expand as well in their scope. So, for example, we did this survey as part of our testing conference, 1,600 participated in. We got to know that 88% of companies are using CI/CD tools, but testing using CI/CD only 46% are doing. Why? Because testers are required to add and assemble their code in the CI/CD pipelines. They do not have the right skill sets to do that. So they are either dependent on DevOps teams or developer teams to do that. But now AI will help them broaden that horizon. Truly connect their pipeline. They don't have to do that learning curve again. Maybe use the AI-based tooling itself to help them write those YAML files to set it, or maybe help them set up GitHub Action or something like that. Right? So connect the roles together, expand their horizons more. So of course that will create more collaboration.
Anything else?
I guess one thing I was just thinking about that was I was actually at the AWS summit yesterday, and one of the speakers there said his company they went from 80% manual testing to 90% automation. Now, that doesn't sound that sounds good. Then he said we did it without having automation engineers write any standing code. They're using AI and AI developed approaches to take people who would originally come in as manual testers and then just go fire them all and say let's have some automation engineers who are a lot more expensive. They said we can use AI to basically this human machine team, and now these people can upskill from manual testers to AI automated manual testers, which is doing automation. And now those developers who could write Selenium scripts can go and do development. Because we all know the shortage of developers, so yeah, definitely.
Nice. Let's start with you this time, Mudit. Do you see generative AI requiring more QA or less QA?
I would feel the QA will remain the same, not more, not less, but just as we discussed earlier, skill sets will remain the same. Will change a little bit, so skill sets will change the way the systems are structured. Gen AI, if you are testing a Gen AI based system, or if you're using Gen AI to test a system. So the way the things are done, they will change. Inputs and outputs will change, but the process will be the same. The ultimate aim is that whatever you are producing is of a high quality. That's the core aim, right, of a quality engineer. That's going to remain the same. So it's just the way the tooling is being used is going to change, but the output will remain the same. It has been happening for some time. Like when 20 years ago, I think how automation started, people were worried that automation testing will take away all jobs of all the manual testers. That didn't happen, right? We still have manual testers, and then people started doing like all those automation frameworks. Maybe they're gonna change the world. They did, but created a new skill set, created a new horizon for people to brought up, right? So way the things are done will change, definitely. But core knowledge that is required to test a system to ensure that it's of a high quality, that skill set will remain the same.
Melissa?
I agree. I think the skill sets will change over time, but then also we'll get to a lot more solutioning new innovations faster, right? Because I feel like, the US period is so way behind, right? Like I feel like we can be so much faster with these tools in place, that being a catalyst and co-pilot to help us, innovate and do a lot more faster digital transformation. Like I'm ready to get to that. Nobody, like I feel like being able to be in an environment where buildings are now connected to data, and you're like walking into a building and it's biometrically sensing who you are. Like that's where we go. So I don't think necessarily that these tools are going to take away jobs. I think they're going to elevate, right? I think it's going to make us a lot faster at solving problems and building more innovative solutions faster it's ever been before, which that's what I'm excited about. I think the accelerator is or have happened.
So you see that it'll be more machines moving in that direction, we're writing tests, we're getting.
I do see that, but I do see that there's going to be more skill sets that are going to be now able to manage machines, right? So that skill set in terms of you having to do manual automated, creating manual automated test plans, or creating the whole DevOps pipeline and all of that, it's not going to be someone that's going to manually do it. It's going to be someone who's managing machines to do that and making sure that the algorithms are doing what they need to do, right? And being able to test out those algorithms, understanding how the algorithms, looking at the analytics.
I'm actually thinking of maybe more QA rather than being on, and I'm not as biased because I'm with software. I mean,
sure?
Yeah, well, as Spider-Man says, with great power comes great responsibility. You got to get that quote. No, but if you think about, I'm thinking about this. I mean, in some ways, AI should make quality easier because a lot of times we look at what do developers do? Hey, I need an algorithm to do X. What do? I go to Stack Overflow and I copy it. So if that's the current state of the art of programming, is Stack Overflow augmented development, then AI in theory should be high quality, that's a little facetious. But in reality, what we're doing is we're going to have computers help us write requirements, potentially faster, more intelligently. We're going to have developers being able to do a lot more things in a sped up way using co-pilots and development tools. As we do more of that, we may be shifting more people down to the quality end. So the analogy I like to think about is, in many ways, software industry is still a craft industry. Like, you think about people making clothes, right? In the old days, you'd have people with sewing needles, and I don't sew, so I'm using the talking about the wrong correctly. You sew, and you make fabric, you make shirts, make handbags, leather, all this cool stuff. And it was done one at a time. And then, the assembly line came along. And with the assembly line, we got rid of a lot of the craft workers. And now we've got quality engineers, supervisors, people monitoring the quality of the factory, checking quality, ISO 9001 at every step in the process. Quality is being measured. So I think if we talk about quality rather than testing, maybe that's different. We may not have more testing, but we'll have more people whose job is to think about quality, less about doing tasks like we do today, and more about quality, risks, and outcomes. Then there's more of that. So I think there'll be more quality-oriented roles and more risk-oriented roles, and less task dev do-oriented roles. I think that's my take on it.
I think I kind of agree with that. If Copilot can help you write good code, it can definitely help you write code to test that. Right. So, the first use case of Copilot was to go through the whole code, like whole repository, and write unit test cases for it. Right. So, definitely. If you want to think about companies that are running, let's say, automation testing, how they can fully scale their automation testing. Go from 10 now, like 100 tests to 10,000 tests. So that's
and if you think about if you're a developer writing unit tests for a line of code, how many paths do you write? 1, 2. This is boring. AI can write every data input, happy path, exception path. So it gives you more time to think about quality as opposed to oh my god, I've got to put a different parameter in China. That was so boring. Right?
And AI can definitely help you write unit test for 300 line code. A unit test that is of 600 lines.
Yeah. So. Which a developer would never do.
Yeah, developer will never do that. So.
Right. Any thoughts on that? Or?
No, I'm.
So we haven't talked at all about risk-based testing yet, so let's touch on that for a second. So what do you see some future trends and advancements in risk-based testing and AI-driven test generation with regulatory compliance, so more regulated industries? Adam, should we start with you this time?
Sure. We are in the DCI, which is, of course, the home of regulated industries, or at least the regulations that shape our industries. So we do a lot of work with life science customers who are doing things with 21 Part 11, healthcare compliance, and any of you guys in like the banks you mentioned, Sarbanes-Oxley, your customer, all these crazy rules. So I think one of the things, as we especially towards AI, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier on, is that if we're going to be doing things faster, we may not have time necessarily to test everything, but we want to think about quality. And what's often forgotten is risk. So risk is a way to figure out statistically like where problems are likely to be before they happen. And so there are some technology out there right now which can start to scan for patterns and look for trends to identify where risks may be. For example, if you've got a team of 100 developers all putting in code, and that code all goes in pipelines, you've got unit tests, you've got all this other stuff running. A generative AI or even deep machine learning can scan that code base and look for trends and start to determine, well, historically, when these 5 developers commit code at 2 in the morning, historically, the risk goes way up, there's going to be problems. Or if they touch this module, because we know a lot of people touch this piece of the system, and historically, it's got some snell, as developers would call it. So using machine learning and algorithms to be able to look for these patterns in the code base, in the testing, in the process, oh wow, the head was in the sprint, everyone's working late hours. We know historically code deteriorates. Like risk-based testing is looking at risk from these different factors and saying, we can tell you what you should be worried about, as opposed to let's run every test in the pipeline, let's run every manual test, let's check everything, which is wholly inefficient. So risk is a way to narrow down the problems where we think and it wants to.
So I want to involve the audience here. Like anybody here who's into trucks, cars, just raise your hands. I'm a very simple question to ask. Trucks and cars.
Oh,
so let's ask you. Like I have a Ford F-150 2007 model. Runs smoothly, have 150 miles. How much do you think it's going to cost?
To sell that?
Yes, to sell to you. If I were to sell to you, how much gonna you pay to me?
Maybe like 3,000 to 4,000. 3,000
to 4,000. That's a good amount. What will you do? Like, what will be the things you will check in that system?
So usually I check for corrosion. It's known for having corrosion. Check for the brakes. I look under the car. I'll test drive myself. Put a report card for it to see if it works. I do all that. I do so much. I don't know why.
Right? Awesome. Now, the reason I asked this is if that truck was going to be sold in India, it has to be scrapped. It's 15 years old. That's Indian compliance. So think the other way around. Like Indian people working on US-based softwares, they don't know much about the compliance part of things. I can help you do that. Right. Yet you know that these are the compliance stuff that you should be aware about. So that truck in India is not going to cost you $1,000. Right. It would be going directly to spring, right? So that's the point. Even though it's working 100% perfectly, because that's the compliance in it. So that's not here. So people who are, when we are working in a global setting, and it's very difficult for everybody to be aware about all the compliance parameters, what different standards are. So for example, Europe, they have that NCAP standard. Like US, they will have different standards. So somebody testing those systems will have a different way to do that. But they should be aware about those standards as well. This is something that they can definitely help out with.
You try to buy cars. Yeah.
if you can afford the shipping. Actually, a company called Copart. Yes.
Would it be fair to say AI will require to be more part?
Both. Yeah, definitely both. Because one of the things is now with AI, we're bringing in everyone. We never really heard of the social science. Now we're bringing social cares or social workers being part of software development, trying to make sure that there is this barrier for some integration of the human approach when you're doing it. So I think it's a little bit of both. Any engineering thing. There's always an art to it, right? These chairs wouldn't be the way they look without the artist coming up with them, right? Or the chairs are kind of just blah, but having art to it is the same thing. So I think being able to incorporate for all.
Just to add to that point, most famous artists are scientists themselves.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
They cannot create the right painting unless they have that science for paint all set up, right? So yeah, it starts with science. Of course, as you scale up, ultimately it becomes an art form. But the best part is, like, I see a lot of data scientists over here, so they're on the right track. AI starts with data science. From there, data science, right? So from there, it becomes data art. That's AI.
And just so I can touch on that too, even with, if you look at the artists and creative life cycle, with the science, we both match up. It's all about science. So without them, it doesn't make sense.
I think, yeah, you definitely need both. I think if you take the question in different ways, I think for the last few years, we've gotten very obsessed around like hiring CS degrees. Like, I think there's always should have been this balance between science, 100%. But I think for a long time, a lot of organizations were like, we're going to hire 1,000 CS majors, and when they've been just super focused on the CS, and your parents are telling you, go get a CS degree, or you have kids, you're telling your kids, have a CS degree, get a job, it's great, don't worry about it. I think now we're trying to realize that there needs to be more balance and harmony between the two, because the ethics and AI, in the previous one of these talks, and to talk about ethics and AI around some of the law sentencing systems like Compass, and there's been lots of bias issues with AI. So having people from ethics, design, ergonomics, I think you're right. I think we're going back to the norm, which had this balance, but I think for too long, companies have just been hiring troves and troves of this programs and throwing them like a factory out there.
Well, the idea of bringing so many voices to the table, right, and from the art side of it, that you don't just have people with CS degrees, you have the social scientists, and you have the artists, and you have the people who do writing.
Now orchestrating them all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a different story.
The AI does that.
And the hard part is not understanding the same language.
Exactly, that's the hard part, right? Is because when you get the engineers and then the creatives in the room together, you're like, it's the orchestration.
Yeah. There's actually a great story about that. Dr. Dre, who founded Beats, and he went on to join Apple. He actually started a program for the high school and college program, because when they went to Apple, they found that the techies, the business people, the marketing, and the creatives, none of them could understand the same language. And it really impeded their ability to bring these products that were particularly, there was music, there was hardware, and there was software all together. It was very, very hard to do that. So they recognized that education in this country, the systems we have on us would give those kind of interdisciplinary projects.
Yeah, and it's, I think in this country, it's made it silent. Like, we are silent when you think about it. The mere fact that someone has to ask us, we shifting, right? If you look at how things are made, they're made with creativity and engineering together. But the mere fact that we're trying to make everyone silent, it doesn't make sense. Like, we should all be working on projects, like the education perspective. We should all be working on projects together that build innovation, right? From when you're a child.
Right.
So you understand that this cycle is always continuing.
Are parents to blame?
No, the education system.
Well, the parents will tell their kids, get a job, go get a job, go do computer science, don't bother about this, or a reflection of the education system.
Could be.
Yeah, I was doing the fun stuff in college. I was playing games.
Still
I was
engineering.
still
I think Christina kind of opened the floor to other people posing questions. Are there any questions from the audience?
Yes, please.
I think Christina was right here in the.
Hi, I have a question about tests in open-ended and AI applications, since we have a lot of black box sort of AI tools now, and we have training that goes on top of those tools. How do you address the challenge of generating good test cases that handle not just like errors in terms of syntax, but like unexpected results? And like, how would you design like a test to cover all of it?
I mean, like negative testing?
Kind of, or like if you're having an open-ended application with your using AI to either generate or parse some data. How do you? I mean, I guess parsing would be a lot easier if you have like defined test cases. But like for creating, how would you like address the challenge of like testing?
Melissa, do you want to start with that?
No, I'm too tired.
I'll take that one. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit similar to this. It's hard. I mean, it's hard. So I think the question, if I understand correctly, is you've got a self-learning system where you maybe give it, it's learning the data you're giving it, the training data, and you're having it do certain things, and it's unpredictable. And whereas if you're building a traditional system, I suppose, you have requirements, user stories, ethics, whatever methodology, and you can test to that. But here it's learning. It's like trying to understand testing a kid that's just been born, that's learning. How do you know what's right? But maybe it does something that's not designed, but it's good. Like it's a positive feature. It's not a bug. The old joke is a bug, not a feature, not a bug. In this case, it could be true. So I think part of it is going to be that I think you can't automate all of that. Some of it's going to have to be putting into testing in real world environments. The other thing is potentially having AI models that are like as it's learning, having other models learning from the same data set, comparing them and doing we have 2 or 3 different models and they check each other. We able to see if we have 10 models learning from the same data, are we getting to consistent results? Did they learn weird behaviors? Do we have to try and retrain based on that? I mean, it's a difficult problem. I don't have a simple answer, but I think it's a big issue. And a lot of the ideas around risk-based testing are if we can at least understand the risks. So a good example, I'll give you a good example of this in the real world, was that self-driving car technology, they were doing some training on this, testing on this, and someone, I think deliberately, managed to show the cameras on a car what looked like a stop sign, but it was written in a certain way that it looked like a yield sign. And over time, they managed to poison the AI, and no one knew this had happened, but it effectively, instead of the car stopping at a stop sign, where the pedestrian was walking or someone or another car's coming, it learned that as effectively a slow down sign, but not stop. It went right through, and in real testing, it wasn't tested with kill someone or crash into another vehicle. And it's called AI poisoning. And so malicious actors are doing that intentionally, but even unintentionally, you don't know what it's learning. And I think one of the talk about that was really fascinating. This is really interesting. So they were building a system that would actually was trying to learn how to diagnose if a patient had a disease. So they gave it all these MRI scans, gave it a little MRI scan and said it read the MRI scan, and amazingly, it learned by itself how to detect if someone had, say, a tumor or didn't have a tumor. Now, what they had also did, what the researchers didn't realize is that they were comparing this with what a doctor had already done. So they had these charts, and the doctor had already done the diagnosis, and then they were using AI to learn from. Now, the doctor in the top right, in tiny writing, wrote their assessment. What it had done is it had learned what the doctor wrote and could now determine between a positive or a negative case. So all it was learning, but the researchers who were doing the testing had no idea it had learned that. So once they gave it MRIs where the doctor had not done the diagnosis, it couldn't detect anything. And so, but in testing, if you have test cases that you would not cover it, you would not match it. So that's the risk.
Would you not?
What's that? Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
So this is my is if you know that I honestly believe that you have a number of permutations. You can get to, if you have the right data scientist, the right, statistical equation, you can get to the number of permutations for at least 85% of the area. And in that 15% that you're thinking of that may not be there, they shouldn't be at a higher risk if you got to the team. Does that make sense? Like they should be at a lower risk.
Right.
So I just think personally that wasn't right? Because you should be able to look at the requirements and say, you know what, here's a data element, like that writing is a data element. Right. This is a data element on this document. That should go in as a scenario into the machine learning. You should be able to analyze.
Right. Or exclude it. Exclude it.
And so I just think that it's a part of paying attention to all of the inputs on the information that you're providing.
Right. I guess in case of the self-driving car, having enough sensors, maybe having video, having radar, LiDAR, things that would so enough inputs that even if the road sign it detected was misunderstood, it would know that if there's a car or pedestrian in the way, maybe stop anywhere. I mean, maybe there's other. That's sort of the idea. Right?
Yeah, and I think we can get to enough reputation to do good quality.
Right.
And to get to the
To add to this point, right, like got a chance to work with Microsoft Copilot teams and also the OpenAI team behind all of this. So usually how their testing happens is they have also IBM watch. So there are two types of AI that I kind of broadly categorize. There is cognitive AI, so that is the bigger artificial intelligence thing that looks at a large piece of data, find inside out of it. So that's easy to do a QA of. So you just do the QA of course the data itself. Data should be of great quality, right? Then also you can get the right insight out of it. And then you compare that this is the insights I want to find. AI is able to find that or not. I run that problem, like I run that manually, compare. But then it comes about the generative. Generative AI is a very niche application of AI itself. It goes into data science, then it goes to pattern finding in that data, and then it goes to natural language processing, and then generative AI, right? So it's a very niche application actually of AI. So in that regard, usually people like sanity testing happens in probability itself. Right? So this is the question I asked. This is the answer I get. How much, and this is the answer that is expected. How much of a pattern they are in, and they use another AI system to manage that probability model. So there is a threshold that it is 80% or 60% it is passing. I think 80%, 90% is matching, so it's a good aid. But after that, it's all up to us. So anytime you run a chat GPT answer, you have that thumbs up, thumbs down. That is actually you are doing testing on chat GPT.
That's true.
Yeah.
Those microassessments were important.
Yeah, right. So that's actually what product management and everything is all about, right? User interaction. So every time you ask the question and you lead generate, that's a QA you are doing for them, right? So all of that is happening.
I would put it in slightly different practice, right? You can train your adversarial models, right?
Yeah.
Kind of feed it around it.
Yeah.
To try to make this model create something more.
Yeah.
If you have the two battling back and forth, right? You can either get a set of test cases that was an adversarial one,
Right.
saying that and the model failed out. Or you get some idea of it. The other thing is if you try to replace them, you might have some. Might not be ground truth data, it's not labeled, but it might be what's your current state of the art, and we compare against that. We might not know how much better it is, just that it's matching. If we're matching the ones that we know we're writing our system, we've got a good idea of what you're doing.
Great. I think we had another question from the audience. You and then you.
Sure. Well, there's lots of now more AI generated code and now AI generated tests and we're monitoring that space, but not enough hallucinations happen and AI generated a big library, those libraries, let's just like how do you use your like supply chain, software supply chain, all this extra AI?
I think that's something that gentleman was also highlighting. Right? So AI is there, of course, and it's just another tool. You use it for good, you use it for bad. There are biases, what we call, that could be in the data that is being analyzed, and that could definitely create wrong interpretations of that data. So that's what I said earlier as well, that the whole testing of AI or the whole testing of AI system starts with that first input data itself. That have to be of right quality. As you mentioned, we will have the same test cases that what happens to the system when we put the wrong input. Like when that's in fact the negative test case, right? When we create systems provide inputs that are not expected inputs. So what happens then? So definitely it will make the job of a tester much more. Like there will be a lot of things to test, but that's another system, like another testing to do. So we have to ensure that the quality that is coming out of an AI system, it has to be at par. So I think it's come back to the same basic software testing principle, quality of the system itself.
So I personally think we just need to put more policies in place. Of course, I'm from here. So of course, I'm just regulations and right, because I feel like, you know, at the federal level, you have the ATO process, right, which is your authorization to, and when you go through that process, you have to show like what your code is to. And so now we have artificial intelligence. The mere fact we're like questioning, we didn't know that it did that. That's scary. Right? So if you have your taxes going through a system, you're like, I didn't know my taxes were reading all that. Like, that's not, I don't think that's right. Like, right? Like, you don't want to, be exposed to a system that you're having to question and then experience hallucination, right? So if we're having these questions like that, or we're having this issue with the medical device, think about that with your taxes. Tax time is coming up. I'm already going through some tax things. That's why it's coming up right now. But just think about it, that if there's a hallucination with the IRS, like that's not right, right? Or with the Food and Drug, or with CMS. Like, that's not right from a federal level. So we need to have some type of ethical standard in place that's going to allow us to know what are these systems actually.
Yeah, I think one thing of the question I mentioned is about the supply chain. One challenge, of course, is that when you're building software, you're even building it for the federal government. You're many times using libraries that are considered standard public libraries, like open source or even closed source. And those ones, even though you're maybe getting a specific operate, you didn't write every line. And with AI, that's becoming more prevalent. And I think even before AI, there's cases, very known cases of both the US doing this, like I think the US has injected deliberately backdoors into projects to get access. And also, there was recently a case, I think it's a few days ago, the XZ Linux distribution, someone committed deliberately malicious code into a well-known library, it was log4j. So even before AI, humans are doing this, the actors. So on the good side, so I guess the bad guys are going one step further. So they're using AI to generate this stuff on demand. So I was actually at a security meeting and I heard about this new thing called, I forget what the technical terms, but it's actually malware that isn't malware when you download it. And it goes out to ChatGPT and actually rewrites itself into malware once it's on your environment. So this is the latest. This is actually the latest threat they're modeling right now from cyber is you download something that is benign. It's got maybe a macro or something in it. You have a virus scanner like your ESET or
becomes its own cancer.
Right, exactly. It goes out and it rewrites itself, and because it does it using ChatGPT, here's the clever thing. Every time it gets rewritten on a machine, it's different. So even the signatures are not the same across machines. So your classic signature detection doesn't work. So the bad guys are doing this, as you said already. And so what a lot of the AI, a lot of these security firms are doing is using AI. So instead of looking for a standard virus pattern, which is what most virus tools use, or a user pattern, they're going to have to look for permutation patterns, and they're going to have to model out what this thing. So it's this cat and mouse thing. But it's crazy. Malware is being rewritten in real time on your machine to evade detection using ChatGPT. That's not. That's a real example of it.
Not fair.
I know.
So all the security guys here go home and shut down all OpenAI API points.
Well, that's the thing, right? That's exactly.
Shut down all OpenAI API points from the system.
I think we have time for one more question. So Jenna.
Yeah, sure. I'm glad you brought up the XE vulnerability. That's where my question's kind of like stemming from. But with open source software and commercial software, I know we talked a lot about how we're implementing AI into commercial software with SDLCs. But there's always been this relationship between open source software and its support for larger commercial projects. And I think one of my concerns is, like we saw with XE, not having a good maintainer structure, but also like a lot of eyes on it. There's potentially a risk of, I guess, like open source software that doesn't have like the same like funding to deploy AI models to ensure quality on those like kind of like really critical libraries that basically everyone uses. Is there like, I guess, risks in the proliferation of AI and its relationship between like commercial software and open source software? And so what can we do to like, mitigate that and like provide tools to open source software that won't have, the money to support that?
You can start a holy war by saying it's closed source, open source, more secure. There's always a holy war between open source and closed source. Interesting, XC was found by Microsoft, even though it's a Linux, it used to be the enemy. So I think the problem we're into right now is that on the shoulders of a small group of unpaid volunteers, large companies are building entire commercial applications. So open source is no more vulnerable because you've got lots of eyes on it. Obviously, there aren't necessarily paid people to look at it, and then closed source has less eyes on it potentially, but less able to commit to it, so it's more protected, but it's less observable. So there's pros and cons. The problem I think we run into is what you mentioned is that with a lot of closed source software that relies and makes a lot of money, that relies a lot on open source software that doesn't get any money. And I think it's that financial balance is the problem. Because if open source software would just be used for other open source projects, it wouldn't be that's such a problem. Because when all these large companies use it free, don't pay back, it's tragedy the commons like the ocean with all the fish. I mean, so that's where maybe government or some revenue structure is that if you're going to use these libraries, there has to be some way of either it gets paid back or there's a cadre of paid people whose job it is to work, especially if it is used in critical. It's like a tax on using. I don't know. It's a hard thing. If you've got an open source project, should you tax a closed source user of it in some way to pay for its maintenance? I mean, it's controversial. I don't know.
Did you see that just yesterday, today, I think unpack the video conversion software?
Yeah.
They posted public message from machine Microsoft Teams group.
Yeah.
Saying this urgent bug in your software that we need to fix following customer problem.
Oh man.
Teams. Yeah. And they were like, we're a bunch of volunteers who are going to our company.
Yeah.
We'll take our time.
Right. That's the problem. I don't know. I don't know the answer. Yeah. What's the answer? And
Yeah, so like another thing I want to add is everybody talks about like I want to work on the open source world. I would say this is the first thing that you can find bugs, create bug requests, right? Like that the most number of pull requests, or not just pull requests, like most number of issues that are created in open source repositories. So it definitely gives people a chance to become part of the project. But your point remains that there will always remain a closed source, big company, and then open source fight kind of thing, a war. And ultimately, it will come down to the way the big open source projects are being funded by big companies. So you will have right now, because AI is in a very early stage, we have a lot of different players working. But ultimately, what in practical will happen is that few good open source projects will then get backed by a few big companies, and then they will become all set in that. So I personally do not want that. I like working with small and a lot of open source projects, but practically that's what end up. That's what I feel.
This is what I feel about open source. Is like, would I walk into a building that was built by volunteers? Everything ends, right?
I have a plane made by women.
So, and the reason why I bring that up is because, like, again, I'm a strong proponent of having a good foundation and not having that in place with the speed of which technology is moving with AI. It's going to elevate the security. And so if you're only going to have volunteers that are going to contribute, that need to be either trained in making sure that the are in place, or looking at it every day, following whatever regulation or protocols around that to make sure and to keep the community.
Right.
And if that's not in place, it's not.
And speaking of community, I think or is our time up now? Yeah. Okay, great. No, I was just saying thank you. Thank you for this community for coming together to welcome our speakers and good partners here tonight. And thank you so much for Christina for putting this out together.